Remember? Give me the tragedy of the commons for dummies. Give me the summary. What's the idea behind it, Dominic?
Where the shepherds brought all their cows to the one field and grazing land and all over.
Okay, but what's like the underlying principle we talk about? Will?
People will abuse
Public power?
public resources.
Abuse as in what?
And not consider speech.
Right. So if it's free, we use it up, is essentially the idea. If it's free and nobody's controlling how much you can take, we'll take it all about as fast as you can imagine. Yeah. Really good example of that concept is overfishing. Let's take an imaginary trip to the grocery store. You ready? Do you like the grocery store? Man, I love the grocery store. I love food. I love free samples. But most grocery stores, the way they're laid out, and like Costco is sort of an exception here, sort of, not completely. Most grocery stores, if you want to eat real food, you stick to the outer areas, right? You stick to the walls of the grocery store and you tend to not go wrong. You get the fresh produce, you get the meats, maybe some dairy. Go to the seafood section in your mind. What is fundamentally different about the seafood you buy in a grocery store? Fundamentally different between that and all the other meats you can buy in the grocery store. What's different about seafood? True. Seafood does go bad quicker. Post-mortem changes happen a lot quicker in seafood, so they keep it on ice a little colder than other stuff.
It's usually the whole fish.
I don't know anymore if it is, but yeah, they do sometimes display the whole fish where you're not going to see a whole pig or a whole cow in the meat section.
It smells awful.
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes it smells pretty bad.
They package it from you.
Sometimes they package it in front. They do that with other meat sometimes too.
Is it overpriced?
It's expensive, that's true, and that has to do with the thing I'm fishing for here, so to speak.
Why fish are worth more?
How about just there are wild caught fish? How about, can you think of any other meat that you can buy at the grocery store that was taken from its natural habitat, that is actual wild game? Maybe if you go to Jungle Jim's, some venison, some crazy weird meats, right, that they have, which is awesome. I love that. But for the most part, no, the bacon you're buying isn't from a wild boar. The hamburger you're getting isn't from a wild cow. There's no wild cows, I think. Yeah, fish are basically, seafood are basically the only thing we still, industrial versions of it still come at least half from the wild. Now there are farmed fish, but the fact that we're supporting the world's population on a wild caught meat means that, of course, those food fish are being depleted. And the reason I call up Tragedy of the Commons and why it's such an easy example of that is the concept of international waters, right? You know about international waters? You've all seen it in a movie, right? Where the bad guys are in a speedboat and they're running from the good guys. They just killed a bunch of dudes, but then they cross this imaginary line, right? And they pull up short and they're like, ha ha, you can't catch me, coppers, because I'm in international waters. Dang, just missed them. Yeah, it doesn't really work like that. Like there are crimes that it doesn't matter where you are, but it is almost impossible to enforce fishing regulations in international waters, which means we're looking at a big bucket full of $100 bills, right? We're looking at something where you can't regulate how many fish people take. The fish are worth a lot. You know, like a big old tuna, that's thousands and thousands of dollars worth of fish. You can just take them if you have the stuff to take them with. So of course, those fish are being depleted. Salmon, halibut, cod, crab, tuna, all of the above are much lower and smaller populations than they used to be. There's limited solutions here because, first of all, yes, you can close areas to fishing. But it's much harder than closing areas to hunting because it's water. And enforcing regulations on water is way, 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 way harder because you need boats. You need people in boats to enforce that stuff, right? And there's a lot of water out there. Pretty featureless, right? You kind of just got to hope you catch them. You also have to worry about small family fishermen type people on the East Coast, especially. You close an area to fishing, there are families that just have small businesses that rely on selling their fish that you are now putting out of business. So you got to think about that. Fish farms, great idea. A lot of the fish you see now of certain types in grocery stores are farmed. Tilapia is a widely farmed fish. Salmon can be farmed. Although, do you know about salmon, what they have to do to it so people will buy it? Yeah, salmon are pink because of what they eat. Yeah, there's like little, I don't know, it's plankton or krill or something that turns salmon's flesh pink. And farm-raised salmon are just white, and people want their salmon to be pink, so they dye it for them. Yeah, so it works. Unfortunately, fish farming comes with its own set of problems. They tend to be pretty big polluters of surrounding areas. Fish farms, they also absorb, we're about to talk about an issue of biological magnifications. A lot of toxins that can be in the soil are easily absorbed into fish's flesh and can actually make the fish toxic. So it comes with its own problems, but it's probably honestly the future as we fish down all the wild population. All right, last thing, biological magnification. This is one of those things that exists only with certain pollutants, but certain pollutants do this weird thing where they, in fact, in the levels that they're put into the environment, are pretty much harmless to living things. No problem. The first example, by the way, and you may have heard of this, there's a pesticide called DDT. I don't remember what it stands for, but it was billed as like the safest pesticide ever made. Like you could sprinkle it on a tomato and then eat the tomato and be fine, right? What they didn't realize, and nobody realized until a scientist named Rachel Carson wrote a book called Silent Spring, was that that's a toxin, and so are several toxins in electronics today, that undergoes a biological magnification where they become more concentrated as you go up trophic levels. As you go up the food chain, this gets worse. And here's why they get worse. It's because of the way they stick to living tissue. The way they kind of embed themselves in living tissue means this. Do you remember the rule of 10%? How much energy gets lost as you go up? 90% of the energy gets lost. Great. Which means that your small fish that's eating plankton has to eat a lot of different plankton throughout its life to stay alive, right? And it's losing 90% of the energy from that plankton because it's burning and it's, turning it into heat to do its stuff. However, if each of those plankton had a certain amount of DDT in it, and the DDT sticks in the little fish every time, you're getting 100% of the DDT from those plankton, but only 10% of the energy. You're basically magnifying it by 10. Does that make sense? And then the next trophic level, you magnify it by 10. And then the next. And you get to the top predator level, that's usually where we see problems. The book was called Silent Spring because what it killed, it turned out, was birds. Bald eagles were the ones we noticed, right? It was birds of prey. Bald eagles we happen to be in love with because they're our national bird. And so it was kind of lucky that bald eagles took a plunge there because that's what got people to pay attention. DDT was banned and birds of prey bounced back big time. There's a lot of bald eagles now. Very cool. Mercury and other heavy metals are the problem now. The stuff that leaches out of computer components and phones and stuff like that, same deal. Sticks in tissues and becomes a problem for us. Fishermen, who likes to fish? You ever get a fishing license? Are you old enough to have to get a fishing license? When you do, read the stuff that comes with it. I don't know if it'll be a booklet or maybe online now, but there's always a thing that tells you how many fish you should allow your family to eat from certain bodies of water. It's because of biological magnification. It's because heavy metals like mercury get into the big fish we like to eat because they're fairly high on the food chain. And it'll say like, okay, from Lake Erie, you should only eat this many walleye, per month, and pregnant women should eat 0 walleye from that lake per month because of the levels of whatever. Still happening, right? Biological magnification. Basically, energy is lost, toxins aren't, and as much as 10 times more toxin can be in those high-level predators. To give you a couple of visual cues here for both of these. Overfishing tends to look a little different than you picture it as. You picture it as, okay, all the salmon are going away, all the tuna are going away. It's not exactly like that, because we don't catch and eat the little ones. What they actually call it is fishing down. And here's a little cartoon of it. Basically, you wind up with having only the little fish in the ecosystem, right? Here's a great real life example of a pier, the same pier in Florida, and the record breaking catches, the record catches of each year in 1957, 82, and 2007, same scale, same metric measurement scale. You can see the difference, right? It's not necessarily the fish are gone, they're smaller. And then biologically helpful to think in terms of sort of the percentage that in the tissue that it is, right? So in the water, if the pollutant has been put there at say 2 parts per million, well, since the plankton are filtering that water all day long, maybe they end up with 20 parts per million, and the fish that eat them end up with 200, and so on, until it gets to a harmful level, if that makes sense. Any questions? Okie dokie. So I have one thing. It's not a huge thing for you to do. It's the timeline I mentioned yesterday. It's actually a timeline, kind of a cartoony timeline drawn by one of my favorite webcomic guys, the guy that does XKCD. You may or may not recognize the style. But anyway, there's a link here. I'll put the link in Classroom for you so you can get to it easily. But you're basically going to be following a kind of long scrolling, I think it's vertical, timeline of the Earth's temperature, average temperature, and looking at events and answering questions about those events. So you will need a device